Hi, everybody. My name is Donnie Daniels from the Old Patrol. I'm an old and parole inspector from Session 88, and you're listening to the Old Patrol podcast. Ain't no pro like the Old Patrol. Honor first and honor always.
Greetings and welcome to episode 5 of the Old Patrol HQ podcast. I am your host, Gil Maza. As a Border Patrol agent for over 23 years now, I have always admired and respected our rich, action-packed, and colorful heritage. My journeymen were hardcore, kick-ass alien catchers, and they passed on their knowledge, experience, and all our bad habits onto the next generation. Today we'll be talking with the legendary shadow catcher himself, law enforcement agent officer Hipolito Acosta, retired district director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, who has led an exemplary and amazing career in immigration enforcement, but got his humble beginnings in the United States Border Patrol. He was in Session 109 in Los Fresnos, Texas. You don't want to miss this one. Ain't no patrol like the Old Patrol. Honor first. Wow. So tell me, how did this come about? How did this whole idea come about?
Well, you mentioned Newton Van Drunen. So Newton Van Drunen went down a few months after I got to Chicago. And even though I was a trainee, I think the respect for my reputation really was enhanced by the Newton Van Drunen case. So there was a lot of respect for the management for the recommendations that I did. And I started doing a lot of undercover cases in Chicago, and a lot of counterfeit documents or receiving illegal aliens that were being smuggled into the United States, so we could arrest the smugglers. But it was on a very small scale. But again, working in area control, one of the things that I found very frustrating, that we would work sometimes with the ASU unit that was not a real unit, it was just a temporary unit, but we would work with them, and we would catch a load of 15, 20, 25, and we would simply go to the office, process everybody. The smuggler, the driver would plead guilty to a misdemeanor, get a 6-month suspension sentence, and they were all on the way back to Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I found that very frustrating and a waste of resources, because my thoughts were that we should go after the smugglers themselves. But not only in Chicago, we should go after the ones all the way from where it originated. And so Gary Reddick and I developed information on this smuggling organization run by the Medina family out of Juarez. The Medinas were involved in marijuana smuggling. A huge part of it was alien smuggling. So that was the area that we're going to concentrate on, alien smuggling. So we developed the information and found out actually that the El Paso sector ASU also had filed an investigation on the Medina family, but they had been doing it for several years and had gotten nowhere other than the drivers that we're talking about. So when we developed that information, I actually went to Ted Giorgetti. And again, this is 1978. I'm like a GS9 at the time. Mm-hmm. I go to Ted Giorgetti and I say, we're not doing anything, Ted. And Ted had been a legendary agent as well. He got staffed in El Paso, but he had been in the Border Patrol. And I said, Ted, what we really want to go after are the Medinas. But they're in Juarez, and they have some representatives here. And I said, I want to go into Juarez and get myself smuggled. I want to infiltrate them from all the way from Juarez to Chicago. Honestly, Gil, I thought it was going to go nowhere. And again, it's a very different era back then, because Ted Giorgetti was the assistant district director, and he made the decision. He didn't go to Washington. He didn't go to a region. And he said, well, if that's what you want to do and you think that's the right way to do it, do it.
Wow.
Well, I just stood there and I said, what do I do now? So actually, I started working on it. I want to say something about some of our former agents as well, like Brian Perriman was their supervisor, longtime agent in El Paso with the Border Patrol. When I started working on the cover, Brian Perriman told me, he says, you're the greatest undercover agent we've had here, but I want you to be a whole agent. I want you to do the reports. I want you to do the indictments. And I had seen other Hispanic agents that had joined the Border Patrol, because there was also an era where we switched it over from very small numbers of Hispanic agents to a large number of Hispanic agents. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to be said about that. But nevertheless, coming back to this particular story, so Brian said, I don't want you to be like some of the other Hispanics that I work with, that they all want to do is work undercover, and somebody else ends up taking the credit. And I thought that was monumental for Brian to share that with me, because it was good that I took the credit, but I never wanted to take the credit for myself, because there were so many people that were working and supporting me in the shadows, if you would, that made the cases happen. But because of Brian saying that, I started being very cognizant of the need for good report writing. So when the Medina case came up, I actually drafted up a proposal. And, we didn't have samples to go by back then.
Right.
We didn't have guidelines to go. So I did the proposal on that one. Then on the Castillo case, which is another case out of San Diego that I hope we get a chance to talk about. But so those proposals were important. And they were foundations for me, Gil, because as I grew through the years, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
Right.
Like some of our shenanigans.
Exactly. Yeah. Correct. And so you presented it, you got it approved, and now what did you do to prepare to make your way down and begin to infiltrate that group in Juarez?
Well, some of the things that I did, I decided which identity I was going to use, because I was always changing identities as I worked undercover over the years. I did preparation. I stopped by the Border Patrol Center in El Paso. I did a briefing to a couple of the agents that were working on that same case as well, and told them where we're going to be at. And more with the anticipation that if something happened, that they would know where to find me.
Right.
I actually did a drive-by the location in Juarez where the main smugglers were supposed to be getting together often and doing a lot of the recruitment and a lot of the transactions. And then I spent a couple of days with my sister in El Paso and her husband. And you're going to find this crazy, but I had them as family members. I wanted them to know where I was going through the Juarez. They dropped me off at the location where I went to infiltrate the organization. So again, no backup, no cell phones back then. So that was the first time I had done that. But I felt comfortable. I had a lot of anxiety and naturally a lot of certainly nervousness. Despite the fact that I'm a Hispanic and I have I didn't have a lot of relatives in Mexico, but I knew a lot of people in Mexico. And I knew the culture. There's a big difference between somebody who is a American Hispanic and a Mexican, and that's one of the things that I had to be very cognizant of. So those are the things that the anxieties that I had when I was going in, and then secondly thinking, who do I call? How do I get to anybody? But I ended up in the bar, and I walked in, and it was late at night. I walked in, and there's a lot of smoke in the bar, and there's like shoehorn at the bar. And it's full, and there's people there with guns that you can see that they're packing, and they have on their lower back no attempt to hide it. There's a couple of policemen outside as well. And I walk into that place, and one of the things that I always mention, one of my favorite songs was playing on the jukebox, a song by Ramon Ayala. And I'm listening to that, and again, I'm thinking, why am I here? So that goes on for a few seconds, and then I recall where I was, and I knew. Even I was a very young agent at the time, 25 years old, I believe. I'm thinking, this is what we need to be doing. We need to go up to the main smugglers, and as luck would have it, Jose Medina, the smuggler that I was looking for, showed up after a couple of hours there at the bar.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now, let me back up just for a second. And when you came to El Paso and presented this idea to the people there, to make sure you got their buy-in and you got their backup, how did they react to this idea?
Well, it was different. We had a lot of good agents in El Paso and ASU. Sidney Pierce, Bob Torres, and George Randazzo. They loved the idea. I didn't see anybody saying we'll go monitor you to see you're okay, but it was like, okay, well, let us know how it goes. And it was good, and at the same time, the reality is we didn't have any practice with that. We were innovative, in our own ways, in our own mechanism, and how we did things.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to say one thing. We better not have all the intelligence and the videos and stuff like that, but I think that with our troops did a heck of a job back then.
Well, I'm actually surprised nobody wanted to go with you.
Well, not at that particular time, but I will tell you that later on, when I transferred to El Paso, I never had a lack of volunteers to work with me. Some of the things that came out were really great on it. So I think it's more of a not having known, all of a sudden, it's a very different era. The coordination was very different. I think, certainly, I think we've grown to many good things, and some of the things are a little bit frustrating because in some cases it's very hard to get through on this kind of things. And I don't know if that's discouraging, but it should not be. I think we go through different challenges in each generation.
Agreed. Now, I know that we probably don't need to go through the entire episode because people can read it in Shadowcatcher, and I think they should because that's where they get the full brunt of it. One of the things I noticed is, first of all, your attention to detail is just simply amazing, how you recall everything. And I mean, I'm reading this book and I almost start smelling what you can smell there. I see what you can see there. I'm experiencing the anxiety you're experiencing because you had a way of writing about it that really drew me into that whole situation. And one of the things I found in particular was that throughout the process, right, getting picked up in Juarez and the things that happened subsequently, waiting for your ride to get ready, them dragging you out at night and throwing you behind a truck, and a lot of the really amazing things that happened where you worked your way into becoming part of that, like actually transporting that load, right?
Well, that's correct. Yeah, we had unfortunately, there was a period of time where our agents in El Paso who had not been advised that I was in the load set up surveillance on the house, so we couldn't leave during that period of time because the people inside could see them. On one occasion, when I was in the back of the U-Haul, I don't think I mentioned that we were placed in the U-Haul and the driver and a female up front, but we had been placed in the U-Haul and we took off, and the smuggler, by the name of Gonzalo, got scared, so he turned around and went back. And so the lady who ran the place, she was an older lady, and she ran that place like it came to leave. And by the way, a good way to lose weight. I was there for a period of time, and the only thing we got was bean soup. And so by the time I got to Chicago, I had lost 10 pounds. But that's a little bit of a side story.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I got I went in the back of the U-Haul because they pushed me to the back of the U-Haul. When the driver came back around, I told Mrs. Medina, I said, look, if I had been driving, we would have made it. And Gonzalo got really ticked off at me for doing that. So he told me that you and I are going to have some issues later on. And so that's the way it stayed. The next day, we were placed back in the U-Haul, and I don't know if I mentioned this in my book, but as I was getting into the truck, we had a board to walk up the steps, and I was looking around so I would be able to remember the faces of the other smugglers, because remember, I might be going through an adventure, but ultimately I have to write this down and testify about it. Well, when I do that, Gonzalo sees that and gives me a nudge, and I end up falling and hitting the side of my head, and I still have that big scar on the back of my head, which ultimately I ended up having to be operated on. But nevertheless,
you did mention it.
The second day when we take off, I'm in the back, but Gonzalo spots some highway patrolmen. So he gets scared and stops the truck, and he opens up the back, and he says, "Okay, so here's your stuff. You can drive now." And it was a tremendous blessing, and I'm glad that I set it up from the very beginning, Gil, because otherwise I would have had no way of controlling the load from there up to Chicago.
Yeah, amazing. And so you're making your way through, but one of the things that you really bring out that I was reading was the fact of just the humanity of the entire situation. You're looking at the people that are stuck back there, trapped. You talked about the bean soup getting watery and more watery and more watery as the days went by. and they were malnourished. They weren't being cared for. They were sitting in their own filth. And you also talked about, in particular, a young girl, 13 years old, that had gotten raped initially before you even started the trip, right?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, when I got smuggled into El Paso, most of the group was already there. Because I came in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, or in the early morning hours, I can't remember. But there was a young girl that was on the cement floor that would not move. And there was an older lady there with the group, and I was laying on the floor with them as well. And I said, Senora Guadalupe, what is she okay? What happened to her? And he said, no, she got raped by Jose when we were being smuggled in. He separated her from the group and raped her. And I'll tell you, that was a very, very difficult thing to see, and almost to the point that I wanted to take the load down at that particular time. But I knew that the odds would be against me because of the fact that I didn't know she would test apart, whatever. But nevertheless, so she was raped, and then when we're in the back of the U-Haul, we're bouncing up and down, and I go over to the young girl, and I tried to give her some encouragement, and I reached over and I said, everything's going to be okay, and I saw how she pulled away with such fear. But one of the things that I thought about that time, I said, I will not rest until I go back and get this bastard and make sure he's behind bars.
Yeah, because you mentioned later on in that same instance that Gonzalo had plans for her, huh?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for reminding me on that. So, by the time that we get, I'm in the front of the U-Haul, Gonzalo and I had already decided, if I had not been a federal agent, that we were really going to go at it when we stopped. It was a mutual decision that kept repeating itself along the way because of our lack of admiration for each other.
Yeah.
And so when we got up there, and we're in somewhere in southern Illinois, he takes the little girl and puts her in the front seat. And by this time, I'm driving just a few hours away from Chicago. And I said, what are you doing? And he says, no, I got plans for her when we arrive. And she and I are going to have a good time. And I looked at him and said, oh, you will not. And I said, you're not going to do anything to her. And he said, oh, like something to the effect, are you going to stop me? And I said, you're not going to do anything to her. And I decided to be quiet because one of the things about working undercover is that you want to be a good listener, not a talker all the time.
Yeah.
And it might not sound like that right now, but that's a reality of the character that we have to follow. But nevertheless, so when we get up there, Gary Rennick and I, my partner, had done a case in Joliet, Illinois. And I remember that station, but before I got up there, I had no way of communicating with anybody, Gil. And if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you the part of the story before we get to Joliet.
Absolutely.
Along the way, I kept thinking I got to let somebody know I'm on my way up there. So I went into a place on the way up to Chicago, and for those that don't know, and I encourage them to take a look at the book, I had a big afro at the time. So I went into the bathroom of this hick town up in, I can't remember exactly where it was, Missouri or whatever, and we didn't have as many gas stations as we have now. So I went into the bathroom and I wrote a note on a paper napkin that I wanted to give to the attendant to call my wife because I hadn't been in contact with anybody. So I went up to him and said, sir, and I started giving him the note. Now, mind you, those of us who have worked smuggling loads for somebody who has been in a car, in a trunk, in the back of U-Haul, has been gone for 10 days, you generally get pretty right.
Yeah.
And so I walked up to the guy and I said, look, I'm a federal agent. I need you to get this note to my wife. And he's looking at me with this unruly afro that I have. Yeah. I stink. And he said, no, get away from here. About that time, Gonzalo starts walking over towards us, and I said, please. And he didn't want to take the note. And he saw when I started looking at Gonzalo, I don't know, I got intervention or whatever, but he took the note and put it under the register. Uh-huh. And so I took off, having no idea. But in that note, I told my wife, tell Gary I will meet him at midnight at the Exxon station in Joliet. That was the entire amount of communication to Gary. And so it gives you an idea how close we were in working those kind of things, even without the lack of communication. So, but here's the funny thing. So the gentleman at the store called my wife, Colette, and she refused to take the call.
Oh.
She had no idea, something to the effect, man, you have a collect call from Missouri for Jim McGuire. I don't know any Jim McGuire. Boom. So he calls again, and she refuses to accept it. He calls once more, Gil, I think, and then he says something over the operator. Tell her I have a note from an undercover agent. There was something else.
Unbelievable. Now, one of the things also that you mentioned in this event was the fact that you thought you had backup the entire time you were in the middle of this operation, didn't you? But you didn't.
Well, I thought we had backup. I thought we had backup initially in El Paso because the agents kept preventing us from going, but they were surveilling the house without knowing that I was there. And so, no. And yeah, you go through the expectations that hopefully I figured, well, I briefed El Paso. I told them where I was going to be at, when we were going to go, and I figured, and they saw that there was a U-Haul there at that location. So I kind of, you kind of figured that that would happen, but that was not the case.
So basically, you were on your own all the way up to the point where you got into that store and snuck that note to that clerk.
That's correct. I was several hours away. I guesstimated when we were going to get there. So, but I want to come back to the story of Gonzalo, and I guess as we say, the statute of limitations has expired, right? Not that I did anything criminally in that aspect, but
which is my next favorite phrase ever, also.
Yeah. So Gonzalo, we get up there. When we stop at the Joliet store, because by this time I'm driving, so I'm controlling. He was upset that I stopped because we didn't need gas. But so when we stopped, I jumped out of the vehicle and I spotted Gary. So he had understood my note pretty well, and I ran in. I said, Gary, give me 5 minutes with this turkey, and said, you got it, partner. And so I went and opened the door, and I said, Gonzalo, now's the time. And he said, yes, it is. Gonzalo had injured his toe, kicking either one of the agents or when he threw a kick at me. I don't know, but it had gotten really, really swollen. And as I was getting there, in my mind, I said, that's the first place I'm going to put the hurt on him. Mm-hmm. And so when he jumped out of the U-Haul, and he was ready for me, and I took a big step and stepped all over his big toe. And well, you can imagine, he dropped his hands in a hurry, and you know where the next blow landed. So I took him down. I have to say that it was I hit it 3 or 4 times, and then Gary by that time got back there with our backup team. I don't encourage anybody to hit anybody, Bill. I'm not promoting that.
I know. But how satisfying that must have been. How satisfying that must have been.
Yeah, well, I think of course the little girl was pretty scared, but nevertheless, I think it was a little bit of a payback, a little bit of home justice, and like I said, I don't encourage anybody to get into situations like that. But
of course.
But at the end of the day, it was that's what it was, and Mr. Gonzalo ultimately ended up going to jail for his crimes, and I was that case was successful. But again, I think coming back to our story, it was a pioneer in being able to do that, because we worked very closely from Chicago with Border Patrol agents and all over the southwest part of the United States, and it was a big joint thing back then with the patrol, investigations, and other agencies working close together.
Correct. And now, one of the things, though, that I also wanted to mention was you never knew whether or not that clerk actually transferred that message to your wife until you showed up in Chicago and saw that backup show arrive, correct?
Oh, that's correct. want to say one thing also, and I thank you for the comments on my book on the details. I have to give credit to that to my wife Terry, because I know when I started writing, she would look at what I was writing, and I wrote reports for prosecution, not reports for storytelling.
Yes.
So she would often say, "Look, this is great, but can you put us there? Can you put a little bit more detail? Can you tell us what it smells like? Can you tell us, what the other person was looking like?" So I have to thank her for that.
Well, I do too, because she made she helped you make this a very readable, very just a great read that it was. Every last detail, man, I drank that in just in anticipation to see what was going to happen next. And like I said, it drew me into the story so well that I think I started to smell the aliens, because I too know what people smell like after being stuck or not having a shower for a week on end. And so I was able to put myself right in there. And but I just one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that because you were looking at this instance of human suffering, and we all have to come to terms with that in one way or another. But one of the things that I think you conveyed in your story was the fact that you knew you had even more intent and more passion to take down the people that were exploiting what you call the pollitos that were being smuggled. But you wanted to punish the smugglers, you wanted to punish the cartel, punish those guys. And then after a while, you had to kind of remember that you were going to have to arrest those same people as well.
Oh yeah, I think I try to make very clear in my book that while I want to have emphasis for people seeking a better way of life. When I took that oath, I had no doubt about my responsibilities were.
Correct.
One is because of the fact that I'm very proud of our country, Gil. I'm very proud to be an American. It's the greatest country in the world, and we're a generous country. And I like to say we're a benevolent country, because we actually do protect a lot of people that might not protect themselves. But at the end of the day, there was no doubt what my oath was and my responsibilities, and I was going to follow them. And yes, it's you could not be in the back of a U-Haul with a 5-year-old kid telling you that he's looking forward to start kindergarten when he gets to Chicago, when he's not going to get there. So, those kind of things, I think anybody would think about it. And I think we can be as hard as anybody. But at the end of the day, we know what our jobs are.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it resonated with me as well, is because I also too do my job, no question asked, but I also feel the burden of the fact of just knowing that people are struggling and suffering. That doesn't mean you compromise your job. No, that doesn't mean it at all. But it also means that we are human beings doing a job that can at times be very, very, just make you introspective about humanity, about life, and make you think about those things. Even though they won't result, like you said, you knew you had a job to do, and you did your job, but it's still having to deal with the humanity of the situation, so to speak.
That's correct. I think also, most of us, the great majority of us who have been agents, I spent 30 years with Border Patrol, INS, and ultimately DHS. We also recognize that we are in a situation on the illegal alien population, and I make it clear in my book, because of the fact that we've allowed employers to get away with it throughout the years.
Yeah.
They have been the magnet of doing that. You have, scrupulous employers, the system where, at one time in El Paso, you would not be prosecuted by the federal prosecutor if you only had 5 illegals in your group. So you could have 5 illegals in the trunk of your car, and the U.S. Attorney's Office would not accept the prosecution. Mm-hmm. So what they did, the smuggler did, they would put 5 and 5 and 5, and I think so I think that it's a combination of things, Gil. We're going to do our job with full compassion, but I think we also need to address the fact that, and just about every single agent that I throughout my career would say the same thing. If the aliens cannot get a job in the United States because they're not doing that job, we would not be where we're at today.
Correct. And even up till recent times, they still are not. They don't prosecute smugglers at all. I mean, I've seen most of the time we have to just dismiss the case, and the attorney, the U.S. attorney, dismisses those cases, and we are just looking at ourselves at each other, going, well, sometimes you say, well, why am I still doing this dang job if we're out here, risking everything and doing what we can to, funnel, to stop the flow. But you're absolutely correct. It's like if the system itself isn't going to do anything about it, then they literally have left us, kind of hanging in midair, doing a job that basically is just kind of chasing our tails. But you wanted more than that, and that's why you moved on from the patrol. You went in and you started, volunteered for these major projects. One of the ones I want to get to right now, is before we move on, is also you dealt with somebody named Margarito Flores in a heroin with a heroin delivery, right?
But that's correct. That's a great reminder, Gil, because Margarito Flores. One of the things that I mentioned in my book is that Margarito Flores abused the generosity of our country. We welcomed him to the country, and all he did was become a criminal here. Margarito Flores, by the way, had been arrested something like 16 times by U.S. Border Patrol before I met Mr. Flores. But Margarito Flores actually was a human smuggler during that period of time who decided to get into the narcotics business because he had been smuggling some of the drug dealers into the United States. And so he saw that there was a lot of money in it. Margarito Flores ultimately, I met with Margarito Flores, again, no backup, and that's only saying because it was on a Saturday, but Margarito Flores said that he had 28 pounds of heroin that he needed to sell. When Gary Rennick and I told DEA that this guy wanted to sell 28 pounds of heroin, they laughed and they said nobody has that kind of heroin to sell. And so we said, well, we'll try it. And we had a great liaison by the name of Norbert Kupsta in Chicago. And so we passed it on to him with our informant and us working it because no other DEA agents were working. And ultimately, I met with Margarito and I told him I can only take 13 pounds because I figured that if he was really a smuggler and I told him I would take the 28 pounds, he would have the same reaction. Or are you going to get some money or whatever? But anyway, Margarito Flores was, he said, I'm leaving today. So he went to Juarez, picked up the 28 pounds of heroin, and drove back to Chicagoville. And so I'll never forget, on March 13th of 1982, on a Friday, our informant called us up real early. He said, I have a heroin sample for you guys. And so we went and picked it up, and very unusual, they had given us a 2-ounce heroin sample, which is not common in the drug world. And so by that time, we figured that we did have a good operation with Margarito Flores. We ended up going to DEA, meeting up with the guys, and we're not very happy because it was Friday afternoon, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that we're going to go out to meet with Mr. Flores. And we put a briefcase with supposedly about $175,000 in there. Then we substituted a DEA agent for me for the last minute. So he went in with the money at a McDonald's and had a brief meeting with Mr. Flores for about 5 minutes, and the deal was made. Mr. Flores had the heroin in the station wagon in front of his house, and ultimately, we took him down. But part of the story is this. This is way back, 40 years ago, on the drug smuggling, Mr. Flores from Mexico, and at the time, his wife was 7 months pregnant. And Mr. Flores says to me, he says, can you do me a favor when you found that I was? Don't put my handcuffs on me because my wife doesn't miscarry. So I talked to the DEA agent, and so I told him, Mr. Flores, do you have any weapons? Do you have any more heroin? He said, yes, I do. And so he showed us what he had and told us where the remaining portion of the heroin was in the car that had not been delivered. So we didn't handcuff him, so his wife was having a difficult pregnancy. Mm-hmm. We leave. Mr. Flores gets sentenced to 15 years. Before that, 2 months later, his wife gives birth to a couple of twins, Pedro and Margarito Flores. A year later, Mr. Flores calls me and warns me of a contract on my life. And ultimately, I ended up moving across Chicago because of the threats on my life and my family.
Yes.
From who he reported and the other group. But those twins that were born went on to become the cartel heads in Chicago, Margarito Flores and Pedro Flores. And I'm sure if you Google them, you'll know the story. They became the cartel leaders, I believe, for the Sinaloa cartel in Chicago. And they were, they were doing millions and millions of dollars until they became informants and were responsible for part of the arrest of El Chapo in Mexico. So it's part of the old INS, part of the old patrol, helping the new generation.
So Margarito Flores' twin sons, Pedro and Margarito, became heads of the cartel in Chicago and later on became informants for DEA, and they were instrumental in bringing down El Chapo in recent times.
That's correct.
That is some amazing history right there. Amazing history. And so you then ended up, you had mentioned earlier that you ended up having to transfer from Chicago because of a threat on your life and family. How did you find out about that?
Well, Margarito Flores actually called me from the jail one time, and he called collect. We almost didn't take his call either at the office after he had already been sentenced. And he called me up, and Gary Reddick and I were at the office. And luckily, I answered the phone, and he told me, he says, "I'm not calling you because I'm your friend. I don't want to be your friend. I'll never call you again. But I've never forgotten that you didn't handcuff me in front of my wife." And he says, "I pay you back the favor. I'll never call you again. You need to be careful because they're planning a contract on you."
Oh.
And so that was the beginning of that particular contract. And we investigated everything we possibly could. I was offered a transfer at that time, and I did not accept it. But I believe about 2 months later, we got another threat that was supposedly orchestrated by Newton Van Drunen, who by that time I had arrested again after he had escaped from prison.
Wow. So he escaped prison, and you ended up catching him again yourself?
And Mr. Van Drunen was given a quick furlough, and he never went back to prison. And he set up an even bigger counterfeiting operation in Joliet, Illinois. And so David Garcia at that time was heading up the operation, and I worked it together. He and I were both undercover on that. And ultimately, I spotted Mr. Van Drunen in Joliet, Illinois. There's an interesting part of that story. When we blocked him in to arrest him, Mr. Van Drunen had a driver, and they took off, Gil, and they ended up hitting me with a car. And I think I was dragged for about 30 yards. And ultimately, I got the driver with a blow to the head. I don't know how far we went, but we ended up crashing into a utility pole. And Mr. Van Drunen was detained. He had all kinds of documents that he was printed in Joliet. I mean, it was so monumental that they ended up taking the equipment and a lot of the documents to the academy for training purposes. I don't know what became of them. But so Mr. Van Drunen, after that particular arrest, which occurred in November of 1981, Mr. Van Drunen got some of his people that I had arrested on the smuggling case to conceive another attempt on my life. And at that time, the service asked me to offer me a transfer to Chicago, to Denver and El Paso, and I took the one in El Paso. I transferred out there with the district office, and Mr. Van Drunen was given a furlough a couple of years later, and went to live in Juarez, across the river from where I was stationed.
No. And so let me ask you this, just off topic, real quick. Does your wife Terry now collect calls now at this time?
Well, the technology doesn't require that, but she blocks calls that she doesn't know.
And so you ended up moving to El Paso in '82. But in 85, you ended up joining the El Paso Sector Anti-Smuggling Unit. I am assuming the Border Patrol El Paso Anti-Smuggling Unit, or was it the CIS?
No, he was at El Paso Border Patrol.
Okay.
We had a fantastic chief. By the name of Larry Richardson. We also had Mike Williams was the chief subsequent to that, but I didn't stay there very long after my desolation, because unfortunately Larry passed away when I was an agent here. But Larry was a good chief. He gave me a lot of latitude as well, and I had a lot of respect for him, and he took me for the position in El Paso. I was a young agent, and I'm sure you've been in the service long enough to know that back then you only had 4 to 8 ASU agents in the sector. There was not a lot of them.
Right.
And to get to that particular position took a lot of years. So, and I was pretty fortunate. I think I was 32 years old at the time, or 32 years old. So it was great, and it was a fantastic move to the Border Patrol sector headquarters and anti-smuggling unit, and we had a lot of success in that during my time there.
I hope you enjoyed part 2 of our interview with Hipolito Acosta. These 2 podcasts constitute only the first half of the interview. We will finish our interview with Hipolito Acosta and take up where he and his partner get arrested in Mexico, outed as federal agents, and thrown in the jail in the same cell as the smugglers they were trying to catch. I, for one, cannot wait to hear it. If you want a head start, go get his first book, Shadow Catcher, by Hipolito Acosta, available online at Amazon.com and anywhere other books are sold. Come and browse through the Old Patrol HQ store for some amazing products that you can wear proudly, honoring the history, heritage, and legacy of the patrol with a few shenanigans along the way. Ain't no patrol like the Old Patrol. Honor first, honor always.